The SWIFT system is basically the oxygen that is needed for cross-border payments to breathe. In other words, you're not allowed to send your money from one country to another unless it routes through the SWIFT system, which is basically a computer system, if you will, or a message board system. That allows banks to trade money back and forth and clearing through a U.S. settlement bank system. So in order to trade dollars, you have to have access to the SWIFT system. And if you are kicked out of the SWIFT system, you cannot trade dollars. And if you can't trade dollars, you can't buy oil and you can't sell your goods globally. In essence, it isolates you.
But didn't America exercise SWIFT? I mean, they punished a whole bunch of countries just recently.
Absolutely. And no better example than what they did with Russia, kicking them out of SWIFT. And you saw what Russia did in retaliation. They are selling their goods in gold and in rupee and for ruble and for yuan, and they are sidestepping. It is this bullying, it is this hypocrisy that is making everyone come to the table. It's important to understand something. So all of these banks over the last several years have accumulated with the deposits that they received since the president was able to remove all of the reserve requirements during the pandemic to zero. So most of these banks have virtually nothing in the way of currency on hand. And because they would take these deposits that came in from the depositors and they would buy bonds with them, typically treasuries and in many cases mortgage-backed securities, at rates above what they were paying, of course, to the depositors, but in what was typically considered safe places to be. The problem is all of those bonds have an average maturity or an average yield rather of about 2 to 2.5% and long maturities. And so the problem is that since interest rates have risen closer to 5%, every one of those bonds in their portfolio have lost 50% or more of their value. Now, the banking regulations say that they don't have to mark those to market until they sell them. And so they have a whole balance sheet filled with toxic assets that have lost over half their value or more. So in the case of SVC, when you saw a run on the bank, for whatever reason, you get people running on the bank because there's so little cash. The reserve requirements have been slashed to nothing. These banks are forced to sell their bonds at a huge loss in order to meet customer demands to get their money back. And if enough people redeem or withdraw their money, and the banks are forced to liquidate their bond holdings, which have been eviscerated by rising rates, then as we saw last week, a large bank can become insolvent in less than 24 hours. And that's exactly what happened.
In 2018, the following year, you guys, gold was those same groups that repatriated their gold bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years combined previously. So now something's really going on. These banks are repatriating their gold from the Fed and the Bank of England. Now they're buying copious amounts of it. Really interesting. In 2019, those numbers were up nearly 100% in terms of central bank purchases. It's really ramping up. Central banks not only have repatriated their gold, but now they're really buying it. Out of nowhere, the German Bundesbank, who had attempted to start repatriating their gold a year or two earlier from the Federal Reserve in New York, finally made a big deal about it publicly. And they said, hey, send us back all of our gold. Now, it's important to understand that really, since the end of World War II, the United States held most of the world's gold. And the reason, in a nutshell, that we did was that at the end of World War II, at Bretton Woods, when the dollar was anointed the world reserve currency, we made a promise to the world saying, hey, you can give us your gold because it's safe over here. You've gone through 2 world wars and it's safe over here. And I'll tell you what, we'll pay you $35 an ounce for your gold. And in turn, you take the proceeds of that and you buy our U.S. treasuries. And this will give you a return on a non-interest-bearing asset. And it will be held safely. And we will always sell it back to you for $35 an ounce. So Germany says to the West, give us back our gold. And within a few weeks of that happening, the Bank of Austria, the Bank of Hungary, the Bank of Turkey, Czech National Bank, the Dutch National Bank, all of these banks followed suit, said the same thing. Give us back our gold. And they said it not only to the New York Fed, but also to the Bank of England. We want to repatriate our gold. And this is really strange at this moment, because here we are in the midst of a downdraft in gold that is now going on 5-6 years, and the central banks are repatriating their gold.
We see that, we may be an ally, but when the chips are down and, you may not have our back. And when you tell us you're going green, you don't have our back. This is not the entity that we want to continue being aligned with. It was great for 50 years, but now the rest of the world is moving this way. And as Zoltan Pozsar, the repo market guru from originally the New York Fed and now at UBS, says, this is a new system, a new era dominated by transparency and commodities. So this is why I believe they will use the rails of the Chinese digital yuan for all of these countries to pledge to a new currency that will be a digital currency, but showing the immutability and the veracity of what every country pledges to the new system on a distributed ledger. That is the glue that makes it all stick. The rallying cry is everything that we are doing to destabilize the world and our sanctions. And then you put that into context with all of the nonsense we're doing right now inside our country, and spending money that we don't have, borrowing money that we don't have to fight wars that we shouldn't be a part of, or doing things that are just nonsense and destroying the value of the dollar. It only accelerates and substantiates these moves that are being made by these countries, and many of which have been our allies forever. And they're like, hey, thanks for the memories, guys.
So out of nowhere, the International Monetary Fund, well, this is a group of nearly 200 countries that was established at Bretton Woods, says to the world, hey, we want a new Bretton Woods. What does that mean? That means that 200 countries from around the world want a new standard that isn't what the original Bretton Woods standard is, which is the US dollar is the world reserve currency. It said right on their website, we're requesting a new Bretton Woods moment, whatever the heck that means. But that really started to make me think, geez, this is bigger than even I had thought. When you have 200 countries from around the world on top of the Belt Road Initiative, on top of gold being reclassified Tier 1, on top of all the central banks repatriating their gold, now the IMF wants a new standard. So now I'm convinced something's going on.